Just imagine this for a second. You've just won independence, and now you're responsible for hundreds of millions of people. People who speak hundreds of different languages from thousands of different communities. Your job? Write one single rulebook, a constitution, that can unite every single one of them and guide the world's biggest democracy. I mean, that was the incredible challenge facing India's founders.
And this quote just perfectly sums up the weight of that moment. You see, the Constitution couldn't just ignore the long shadow of British colonial rule. That was the past it was inheriting. But at the same time, it had to be a document of hope, right? A promise for a totally new future as a sovereign, democratic republic.
So, the big question is, how on earth did they pull it off? How did they manage to forge a document so strong that it's still guiding the nation more than 70 years later? Well, let's unpack the story of India's ultimate rulebook.
To really get why this new constitution was so revolutionary, we have to rewind a bit and understand the system it was replacing. And believe it or not, that whole story starts not with a government, but with a corporation.
It all kicked off way back in 1600 with the East India Company, which was really just a trading firm. But over the centuries, its power just grew and grew. By 1773, the British government stepped in with the Regulating Act, starting to centralize control and turning this commercial project into a colonial government. This all finally came to an end in 1947 with the Indian Independence Act, which, at last, ended British rule.
And this is a really crucial shift to understand. The British presence in India didn't begin with an army of conquest. It started with traders setting up posts they called factories. But over time, that commercial footprint completely morphed into a full-blown political power, a territorial sovereign that controlled the entire subcontinent. And that history, that legacy of foreign rule, was the fundamental problem the new constitution absolutely had to solve.
So, as independence became a reality, the whole game changed. The focus wasn't just on fighting for freedom anymore, but on actually building a nation. And the very first, most critical step was to create a body that was capable of drafting the Constitution.
Okay, so this happened in a few key stages. First up, the 1946 Cabinet Mission Plan from Britain sort of laid out the initial framework. Based on that, the Constituent Assembly was formed. Now, its members weren't elected by everybody, but by the provincial assemblies that already existed. This group was already hard at work when the Indian Independence Act was passed in 1947, and that was the real game changer. It turned the assembly into something way more powerful.
It became a sovereign body. And this is the point you have to get. Before the Independence Act, the assembly was still, technically, operating under British supervision. But after, it was completely free. It answered to no one but the people of India and had the absolute, ultimate power to design the nation's future any way it wanted. For the very first time, India's destiny was truly in its own hands.
And what was the big vision that guided this new sovereign body? It was all about building a democracy on the bedrock of 4 huge ideals: justice for every single person, liberty of thought and expression, equality of status and opportunity, and fraternity. Basically, a sense of brotherhood that ensured the dignity of every individual. This was the mission statement for the new India.
So how do you take these really high-minded ideals and turn them into a practical, everyday rulebook? Well, they started by making a series of very concrete promises to every single citizen, and these are known as the fundamental rights.
These rights are really the heart of Indian democracy. They include the right to equality, making sure no one is discriminated against. They guarantee these essential freedoms, like the freedom of speech, the right to gather peacefully, to form groups or unions, and the freedom to live and travel anywhere you want within the country.
Let's just zoom in on one of these for a second. The freedom of speech and expression. I mean, this is the absolute lifeblood of any democracy. It's the right to ask questions, to criticize, to debate, to share ideas freely, all of which is totally essential if you want a government that's accountable to its people.
But the people who wrote the Constitution, they were also really practical. They knew that no right can just be absolute, without any limits. So while they gave this powerful freedom, they also built in a system of checks and balances. The Constitution actually allows for reasonable restrictions on speech in certain situations, like to maintain public order or protect the security of the nation. It's a very delicate balance between individual liberty and the stability of everyone. So who makes sure this balance is kept and that these rights are actually protected? That's where the ultimate safeguard comes in: judicial review.
This gives the Supreme Court and the High Courts the power to act as the guardians of the Constitution. So if the government passes a law that violates any of these fundamental rights, the courts can just strike it down. Period.
All right, so we've got these fundamental rights for the people. But a list of rights is just words on paper without a system to actually uphold them, right? And that brings us to the machinery of government itself, which the Constitution builds on three very distinct pillars.
And here it is, laid out nice and clear. First, you've got the legislature, that's the parliament, and their job is to make the laws. Then there's the executive, led by the president and the council of ministers, and they're the ones who enforce those laws. And finally, you have the judiciary, the whole court system, which interprets the laws and, like we just saw, make sure they stick to the Constitution. This whole separation of powers is designed to stop any one branch from getting way too powerful.
And here's a really key detail about how that executive pillar works. While the president is the formal head of state, India has what's called a parliamentary system. This means the president is constitutionally required to act on the advice of the Council of Ministers, which is led by the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister is the one who has a majority in Parliament. This whole setup ensures the government is always accountable to the people's elected representatives.
So the founders created this incredible structure, with rights for the people and a clear separation of powers. But maybe their greatest bit of genius was understanding that they couldn't possibly predict the future. They knew a country as huge and diverse as India would change, so they designed the Constitution to be able to change right along with it.
So what's with this number, 45? Well, think about this. The Indian Constitution has been amended more than 100 times since it was first written. The number 45, it represents just one of those crucial changes, a moment where the rulebook was literally updated to better serve its people.
Take the 45th Amendment from 1980. It extended the time period for reserving seats in Parliament for historically disadvantaged groups. Now, this isn't just some boring technical tweak. This is the Constitution in action, adapting its own rules to better chase that founding ideal of justice for all. It's the ultimate proof that this rulebook was never, ever meant to be set in stone.
And that really brings us to the final question. In a world that is changing all the time, what does it actually take for a nation's founding document to last? For India, the answer seems to be this mix of really profound ideals, a super robust structure, and, this is the critical part, the built-in ability to adapt. It's a blueprint that wasn't just inherited from the past and designed for the future, but one that continues to live and breathe right here in the present.